What you are about to see is taken from the case files of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Some of the names and details have been changed. July 22nd, 1996. Sarah Francis awakes from a deep sleep with no idea of where she is.
Who are you?
Now you remember my name's Steve.
What?
Steve. Do you remember?
What did you do to me?
In most rape cases, the victim is all too aware of the unspeakable crime committed against her. But in this case, Sarah Francis had absolutely no recollection of her attack. For her, the nightmare of sexual assault was compounded by the overwhelming fear that she would never discover what really happened. I'm Brian Dennehy, and this is Arrest and Trial.
In the summer of 1996, Detective Dwayne Decker of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department received a harrowing phone call from a distraught woman.
She claimed that she had been raped and that she was drugged. She was sent down to the hospital right away, and a rape kit was done on her.
The examination confirmed that Sarah Francis had been raped. Evidence was collected and submitted for DNA analysis. Although Sarah had no memory of the attack, she was able to identify the man she woke up next to as Steve Hagman, a popular local disc jockey. Hagman had never been in trouble with the law, but then a second complaint was lodged against him.
The other case we had was two females and a male. The victims said that they were at parties with Mr. Hagman, and this was all taking place at the compound.
The compound was an old storage facility in Lawndale, California, that Steve Hagman had converted into the ultimate party pad. His decadent celebrations were legendary around the wealthy beach cities of Southern California.
Steve Hagman was a very popular guy amongst his peers. They tended to really trust him. He was charismatic, and in appearances on the surface was a regular guy.
Always the consummate host, Steve Hagman was the first to offer his party guests a drink.
The victims remembered drinking shots of alcohol and said that they had an odd taste to them. The two females felt like something was wrong and starting to pass out.
The next morning, when the two women awoke naked in Steve Hagman's bed, they immediately left and contacted police.
After I reviewed the first two cases, I realized that we needed more evidence, that I obviously knew he was using some sort of drug to overpower the victims, but I had to find out what drug it was, and I had to find out how he was using it.
GHB, yes. Now, what's it stand for?
After talking to a lot of people, I narrowed it down to the drug GHB.
Gamma hydroxybutyrate is a powerful tranquilizer that can quickly and efficiently render those who take it unconscious.
I did a lot of research on GHB and discovered that it tastes funny. It's salty, depending on the drink it's put in. And the victims were being given liquors that had a very strong either licorice taste or cinnamon taste to mask the taste of GHB.
Detective Decker secured a warrant to search the compound for any evidence of alleged sexual assaults and GHB. Authorities were met at the door by Hagman and his roommate, Dan Bohannon.
Steve Hagman's very unsure of what was going on, not knowing anything that was happening. He's told me he'd never heard of GHB, didn't know what it was.
You tell me you don't know anything about GHB?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about.
When I interviewed Dan Bohannon, he said that there were parties there, but he had never seen any women that were drugged or appeared to be drugged by anything, and he had never heard of GHB at the time. We started searching the rest of the house and found margarita salt. We seized that because I was told that GHB was sort of a salty-looking powder in its dry form.
Police also confiscated Steve Hagman's address book.
We also found a trunk, and in the trunk was a pamphlet that described GHB and described how to make it and how it's used.
Detectives also found a hidden camera and videotapes which chronicled several of Hagman's sexual conquests. But it was the contents of 2 boxes recovered from Steve Hagman's van that revealed the horrific scope of the case.
One of the boxes had the women's jewelry, clothing, underwear, and the other box had the photographs. When I first saw the photographs of the victims, I was shocked. I thought we'd possibly find dead women involved in this because they didn't look alive, they looked dead.
Steve Hagman was immediately taken into custody. His arrest marked the beginning of a massive investigation into a horrific conspiracy to drug and degrade women.
The arrest of Steve Hagman cast a dark shadow of fear over LA's freewheeling party scene. Was the charismatic DJ a serial rapist or simply a swinging bachelor looking for a good time? The answers to Hagman's true identity would come from one of his most trusted friends.
We took Mr. Hagman back to LNX Sheriff's Station where I attempted to interview him. I read Mr. Hagman his Miranda rights, and he said he wanted to talk to me.
Let me ask you about the van then, Mr. Hagman.
I then asked him what was in his van. And he said, I'm going to need to talk to my lawyer.
With Hagman refusing to talk, investigators painstakingly sifted through the evidence. While all of the seized videotapes depicted consensual sex, the photos told a far different story.
Photographs were of women's body parts, some of them while they were being raped by Mr. Hagman. They looked completely out in the pictures where you could see their faces. Their body parts were in unusual configurations. It appeared that he just put the victims any kind of way he could to rape them.
But Steve Hagman wasn't the only man in the graphic snapshots.
When I was looking through the photographs, I saw a picture of Mr. Bohannon taking part in one of the rapes. So I went to the judge and obtained an arrest warrant for Mr. Bohannon.
Fearing that Dan Bohannon might have been tipped off by Hagman, police took no chances in gaining entry to the compound.
Sheriff's Department, freeze! Don't move!
Put your hands on top of your head. Dan Bohannon, you're under arrest.
Dan Bohannon was arrested without incident and taken in for questioning.
Take it easy, man. All right. So what you're telling me is you are completely unaware of the activities that have been going on at your compound. Yeah?
Dan Bohannon was immediately interrogated. And at first, he maintained his innocence.
I showed him the picture of him taking part in the rape. He didn't know what to do, and I said, well, why don't you help me identify some of these women in these pictures?
Does he recognize anybody?
He started looking through the pictures when he ran into pictures of his sister being raped by Mr. Hagman. He got extremely upset. He told me he didn't care how long he went to prison for, he wanted to help me nail Mr. Hagman. Mr. Bohannon ended up telling about the whole case. He explained how Mr. Hagman drugged the women, how he used GHB himself, and how he had raped other women in the past using it.
Other than his own sister, Bohannon failed to identify any of the other victims in the photos. Detective Decker turned to the address book seized from Steve Hagman's residence and started making calls. The story soon exploded in the media. Within days, the LNX Sheriff Station was flooded with phone calls from alleged victims.
Company in Lawndale, and I think that I was drugged and raped, and I'm not sure what to do.
Deputy Los Angeles County Sheriff Bernadette Gambino was called in to assist in the case.
I contacted possible victims, let them know that we'd like them to come down to LNX to be interviewed. The reason you're here today is you're going to be looking at some photographs.
There was only one way for Deputy Gambino to determine who had been victimized. Each woman would have to view the explicit photographs.
You may or may not be in the photographs, or you may see somebody you know. The picture that will be forever etched in my mind is the look on their face when they first saw the pictures. And just go ahead and take a look at these. They're looking at themselves in a near comatose state with no clothes on, engaged in sexual activity with a man they had no desire to be with. It's not something that I would ever wish for anybody.
The pictures forced horrible memories to rise to the surface. A wild party, a strange tasting drink, then black. 15 women identified themselves in the photographs, and now they knew the truth.
As one of Los Angeles' largest date rape cases headed to trial, prosecutors had to prove that Steve Hagman and Dan Bohannon had drugged and raped over a dozen women. But they were facing an uphill battle as their key witnesses had no recollection of the assaults.
Los Angeles County District Attorney Gil Garcetti vowed to use the full power of his office to stop this new threat to public safety.
Women today are at danger in many ways, but in one particular way, it's particularly horrible. Women who go to clubs, parties, are having a drink, next thing they remember is waking up in someone's apartment or house, and they know something god-awful's happened to them. They've been the victim of drug rape.
Garcetti assigned the case to Deputy District Attorney Renee Korn, a veteran prosecutor in the Sex Crimes Division.
This was the first drug rape case of such large proportions in California and, as far as I know, in the country.
Stephen Michael Hagman and Danny Richard Bohannon were tried on numerous felony counts, including rape by use of drugs. But there was a seemingly insurmountable barrier to proving this charge.
One of the more difficult things to prove was, if a victim can't remember what happened to her, how do you know you have a rape?
Compounding the prosecution's dilemma was that at the time of the trial, there was no way to test for GHB in the body. They could not even prove that any of the victims had ingested the potent drug.
And I'm sure the evidence will prove my point.
Renee Korn was forced to rely on circumstantial evidence. The victim's undergarments found in Hagman's home, a pamphlet on making GHB marked with Hagman's fingerprints, margarita salt containing trace amounts of GHB. But Renee Korn knew that this evidence alone would not be enough to secure a conviction. For that, she would need the testimony of Hagman and Bohannon's alleged victims.
Please tell us what happened that evening.
We went to a party that night.
Several women bravely took the stand,
Steve handed me a drink.
fighting back humiliation and
Tasted
anger.
funny, but
They recounted to the jury the events leading up to their attacks.
when it all kind of went black.
The stories were eerily familiar.
You remember nothing after that?
An innocent night of fun, followed by a morning of panic and confusion. The defense strategy was both pragmatic and brutal. Attack each and every one of the witnesses.
Let's be frank. You encourage this kind of behavior.
Their defense was this was all consensual. Whenever you have a consent type of defense, basically the defense is going to throw some mud at your victims.
To bolster the defense argument of consensual sex, Dan Bohannon was called to the stand. His anger towards Hagman had dissipated under the threat of jail.
Mr. Bohannon testified he had nothing to do with anything and that Mr. Hagman hadn't raped anybody, and he even demeaned his own sister on the stand. It was really hard for me to see that.
Bohannon was followed on the stand by Steve Hagman.
It was all consensual. They all wanted me.
What he presented was, hey, I've had sex with hundreds of women. I have women waiting in line to have sex with me.
But there was a simple rebuttal to Hagman's claim.
Clearly from the photographs, it's not consensual. Basically, these men were having sex with women who were comatose. And that was my argument to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this guy's a sexual deviant. Look at these photographs.
As the jury retired to deliberate, more was at stake than the fate of the defendants. 15 women had accused Steve Hagman and Danny Bohannon of rape. The jury's verdict would either offer the victims a new start or trap them in a never-ending cycle of shame and guilt. Wild parties that end in shameful confusion and an overwhelming sense of sexual violation. Two self-proclaimed swingers stand trial for drugging and assaulting countless women. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury in the Steve Hagman-Danny Bohannon rape case returned with their verdicts. Danny Richard Bohannon was found guilty of 7 felony counts and sentenced to 19 years in prison. Stephen Michael Hagman was found guilty of 45 felony counts. He was sentenced to 77 years behind bars.
Some men that think, oh, if I get caught, big deal, you know, maybe be exposed to 2 or 3 years, and I say, no, brother, you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life. The main culprit here was sentenced to state prison for an excess of 7 decades. In other words, he's never going to get out of prison. When he gets out of prison, they'll be carrying him out in a coffin.
Danny Bohannon is currently incarcerated at a California state prison. Steve Hagman is also serving his sentence in a California men's correctional facility.
As a direct result of this case, LA County now tests all possible rape victims for any traces of GHB and other so-called date rape drugs.